I ought to turn the microphone on, though. That would be better. Welcome to the Titusville Tree Preservation Workshop of 7/16/19. I'll declare this meeting convened. We do have a quorum. Please join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I have a few ground rules I'd like to go over. This meeting, we have many people that wish to speak, as you can see. We're going to try and as best I can, I would like to see and work toward having it a 2-hour meeting, 7:30. After that, we all start to get a little dizzy, has been my experience. I see a lot of people going, yeah, so that's good. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. And please do not ask for extra time in consideration. There's a lot of people to speak, and then they'll be at the end, and then the meeting will go on for longer than 2 hours. This is a workshop. There will be, as a workshop, there are no decisions made by council this evening. We are here to listen to all of you, regardless of what side you're on this particular item. We will take that into consideration, and council will decide at a public meeting as to what the next action is. So don't expect us to say make any decisions tonight. Anybody who wishes to speak, please go to the clerk up there and ask them for a card. She will give you one, and again, you please keep the 3 minutes. Now, there is one group who has already organized themselves, which is really nice. So we were going to start with that, and the clerk, if you will read the first card.
Dwight Severs.
Mayor, if we could first, we do have a staff presentation of about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll get into
You didn't tell me that.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, we didn't mean to sneak up on you. Okay. The reason that we're here this evening is because council has directed staff to move forward to provide some information about the potential to amend the land development regulations as it relates to tree protection and landscaping. And as you know, this is a very complicated process as well as a very complicated topic. So what the staff is here to do tonight is to give a very brief presentation, and then hopefully we will get from council some of the interest that they have from the various ideas that they hear this evening, so that as we're going forward to create the ordinance, we will be in the approximate boundaries of what the council would like to see. We understand this is going to be fine-tuned in the future, but we would like to start off at least within somewhere of the boundaries of where the council has interest.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
I was under the impression that that is not, do you expect us to do that this evening?
What I was hoping is that if you say, I'd like more information about, if you say, you know, there's something here that I've heard that.
But no decision.
No decisions, but sometimes in the discussion, we can glean some guidance. And we would rather do that so that we can create an ordinance that's at least within the bounds of what council would like to discuss. We don't want to spend the time and effort to put something out that council's absolutely not interested in at all. And there may not be any of those ideas tonight, I don't know. So this evening, first of all, I want to talk to you very briefly about the regulatory structure. The comprehensive plan has a objective 1.2, which gives general guidelines and prevents the clear cutting of land during the development. The standards for clearing, however, are specifically in the land development regulations in Chapter 30, and it outlines what's required to be maintained and installed during development. Recently, the legislature passed committee substitute for House Bill 1159, I can read the pertinent part of that in its entirety because it is short. A local government may not require a notice, application, approval, permit, fee, or mitigation for the pruning, trimming, or removal of a tree on residential property if the property owner obtains documentation from an arborist certified by the International Society of Arboriculture or a Florida licensed landscape architect that the tree presents a danger to persons or property. A local government may not require a property owner to replant a tree that was pruned, trimmed, or removed in accordance with this section, and the section does not apply to the Authority for Mangrove Protection. So regardless of what we have in our code, that is now the law of the land. In the code, we talk about tree preservation and mitigation. Trees in excess of 20 inches DBH, which is diameter at breast height, are considered specimen trees, and a 2-to-1 mitigation is required if a specimen tree is removed. There are 3 ways that mitigation can occur. One is replanting trees on a 2-to-1 ratio. One is 100 square feet of native vegetation at a 2-to-1 ratio per inch of tree lost. And the third is the Landscape Trust Fund at a rate of $100 per inch lost. The LDRs require a minimum percentage of natural vegetation to be maintained. In the case of the residential, they must maintain 10% minimum. The limitations of clearing are that the clearing are limited to building pads, parking, roadways, utility areas, and stormwater retention. It is more common for small commercial sites to be clear-cut than the larger residential properties, and I'm going to provide an example. This is the Forest Trace subdivision. This is the area which are the roads, the area which are the building sites, and the retention. The remainder of that has been left in natural vegetation. This is a 49.5 acre site. Under the 10% standard, there would be required to have 4.9 acres of native vegetation left. In this case, it's approximately 8.5 acres, which is 17% of the site, has been left in its natural state. Okay. Now, we have a couple of options, and these were based upon questions that council had asked us several months ago. The first was that you can always do tree mitigation, and the City of Titusville's mitigation, as you can see, is $100 per caliper inch. We compared those with several other communities, some of which we were recommended as being very stringent. I think if you do the math, you will find that in general, the City of Titusville has a very stringent requirement as compared to several of these communities. There's also the option to have mandatory tree protection. I'm sorry, I could not find the actual area where this particular picture comes from, but clearly they believed in tree protection. And these can be based on the species and the size of the tree. By the way, this is not a recommended way to do that. Another option is to have a mandatory tree canopy that can be done by site as well as for the entire city. For instance, Pembroke Pines has recently set a goal to increase tree canopy by 30% by the year 2030. Now, so you know, Council, this is something that requires, as you can imagine, a great deal of effort to come up with the existing tree canopy. It requires additional staffing over what we have, but it is one option as far as an approach to tree programs. Another one is an urban forestry program. Tallahassee has a long-standing urban forestry program, and their program has 3 goals: to improve canopy quality, to maintain canopy levels, and to engage the community. The Penn State Extension Services publication, Sustaining and Funding an Urban Forestry Program, states that one of the first steps is to find revenues and develop strategies for long-term maintenance of an urban forestry program. So again, there are some financial implications to this type of approach. And then there's the option of improved tree and root protection measures during construction or rigorous planting standards. The example here we provided is Tampa. In that case, 50% of trees planted must be shade trees, 60% of the trees planted on a parcel must be native, and palm trees are replaced 1-for-1 with a recommended tree. So they do not encourage palm trees. So a community can make decisions based on their local needs as to how to approach tree protection and land clearing. Staff is here this evening mostly to listen. If questions come up that we can answer tonight, we'd be delighted. Otherwise, we'll write them down and get back to you with those answers.
Okay? Okay, I think we're ready now.
Dwight Severs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Appreciate the opportunity. Together with my wife, we have presented to you some comments, and I appreciate the opportunity to go over those with you. Frankly, I thought I was going to have more time than 3 minutes, but I'll modify whatever I have to say to meet the mayor's guidelines. I've been a resident of this area for 50 years. We love Titusville, and because of my experience as city attorney for 40 years, I'm frankly quite concerned about the clear cutting of trees and vegetation that has recently occurred within the city. And I have expressed that to you. And all of you have expressed to me that you're concerned about clear cutting of the land. Likewise, I'm glad to see staff mention the comprehensive plan, because in their materials they previously furnished to you, they did not mention the comprehensive plan, which is quite clear. The city will prevent clear cutting of land. The city will not allow the total removal of vegetation. This is your guidepost, your guideline that you're supposed to follow. This is the guideline by which staff is supposed to follow, and the ordinances by which you adopt. I point out at page 2 of the materials I provided to you, a proposed change recommended by staff that shows they want to water down that provision. I respectfully suggest do not water down that provision. In addition, there seemed to have been a question about where the 10% rule came from, and I'd like to remind council that 10% is not 10% of the entire site, it's 10% of a lot, as sort of represented to you a few seconds ago. And the original that was drafted in the 1980s, it was drafted for several reasons. The original draft said all single-family lots shall preserve native vegetation on each lot at least 10%. That's quite clear. Frankly, that language has been watered down over the years, and I've observed over the years, and I furnished to you photographs showing how it's applied today, and it really is not applied today in any sense of the term. In addition, I pointed out to you some language that recently, as late as 2014-15, staff recommended to you deleting from the code in the area of critical concern, which the code previously provided necessary surface grading and vegetating clearing shall be minimal and only occur when vehicle access ways, and utility rights of way, et cetera. That's been deleted. And obviously, in the Forest Trace subdivision, if that had been in effect, you would not see the clear cutting that you see, because it would only be limited to the roads and rights of way and utility as such. And skipping forward, I furnished to you information concerning the current plating process. Is that, I have 30 seconds or what?
I can't see you, you're in front of the light. I think it's 30 seconds.
I would ask to give Mr. Severs more time. He has a unique perspective, and I think it would be helpful.
I agree, but that perspective has been given to us, and I really am troubled by giving time than I have to do it to everybody else.
Well,
Mr. Mayor, if I could just wrap up with a couple of items, I'll
Absolutely.
wrap up.
Wrap it up.
I'm
We
not
took
trying
some of your
to be
time.
difficult.
We took some of your time, so I'll give you another minute to make up for that.
In 2007, at the recommendation of a certain staff person, the plating process was changed in Titusville. It's different than any other city in Brevard County. You do not approve a preliminary plat. You do not see the 103 trees that was removed from Forest Trace. You did not see the 63 trees that was removed from Park Preserve. You did not see the removal of the 45-inch oak tree on Brookshire that's recommended or approved by staff by their report and recommendation. You did not see that. You do not see the filling of wetlands. You do not see the mitigation around the wetlands. You see none of that because it's not a part of the sketch plan. It's solely, and you need to go back and change those. There isn't even a public hearing process in the record. The final thing I'd like to simply mention to you, please, staff, look back at the 1986 Area of Critical Concern Ordinance. It's one of the last things in here, but it clearly states if you remove vegetation, if you lower the topography, you're impairing, depleting the quantity and quality of water. Look at the study, because you're doing a disservice by the approval of certain projects.
Thank you, sir. Next card, please. Next card, please.
Naira, excuse my pronunciation, Atiya? Atiya.
You'd better help me with this because I'm useless with them.
Can you start that presentation slide? Can you start that slide, the first slide? All right, click it one time. Practice. Okay, one more. There you go.
Good afternoon. I'm Naira Atiya, and I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon. I'm a resident of Titusville. I fell in love with Titusville when I came for the Birding Festival in 2003. Bought a house here for my son and one for myself in 2009. And one of the things that attracted us very much to these properties were the big old trees on the property. And on that note, I'd like to share with you a video.
I love Titusville. I've lived in North Brevard all my life, and I can't imagine living anywhere else. Titusville is unique for many reasons. We have the river and the Space Center. We're the gateway to the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge and Canal National Seashore. We're also home to the country's largest birding and wildlife festival. Titusville is special because of the variety of ecosystems found within its boundaries. We have scrub, pine forests, and wetlands, and because of that, we have beautiful birds in our theaters. When I talk to people who came here for the birding festival, the most often heard remark is, "It's so green here. I can't believe there's so many trees." People have bought homes here because they came to the birding festival and fell in love with what we have. I'm really concerned that we're losing a big part of what makes our community special. For example, this is prime scrub habitat that's so important for recharging the aquifer where Titusville gets its drinking water. This giant oak tree has been approved for removal. In fact, nearly every tree on this property is doomed. Is that really necessary? This is Sterling Forest. It was one of the first clear-cut subdivisions that happened in our city nearly 15 years ago. I remember how shocked everyone was when the trees came down. As mitigation, one little skinny tree was planted in front of each new home. Some grew into nice trees, but it appears that less than half of those original trees have survived. This is Forest Trace. It was clear-cut before these homes were built. This is what the landscape looked like before it was cleared. One little skinny tree was planted in the front yard of each home, Do crepe myrtles really count as replacement for native trees that were taken out? I wonder if these trees will fare any better than the trees that were planted in Sterling Forest. This is our newest apartment complex, Solomere Grand. This is Wendover Oaks Apartments. Not only were large trees left right next to the buildings, they even left islands in the driveways to save the giant oaks. This is Village Grove in Lucida. The lots are small here, just like the lots are in the new subdivisions. Look how many trees were left on these small lots when the homes were built. These homes are worth more money because they got trees inside the subdivision and not just around the edges. This is the future for new housing in Titusville if we don't strengthen our tree protection rules. Trees are important to the people who live in our community. We have a wealth of what other communities are struggling to put back into their landscapes at great cost. Why are we allowing this loss of our precious tree resources? It's time for us to create stronger tree preservation regulations for Titusville. I sure do hope you all agree.
Next card, please.
Maureen Roop.
Thank you.
The critical importance of trees. Trees clean our air. The United States Forest Service study found trees remove pollution, improve air quality, and human health. Lancaster University United Kingdom study found roadside trees reduce nearby air pollution by more than 50%. They contribute to human health. Trees provide us with oxygen and remove CO2. One tree provides oxygen each day for up to 4 people. One mature tree can absorb 48 pounds of carbon dioxide. 1 acre of trees can absorb carbon dioxide from a car driven 26,000 miles. Trees save energy. Shading cools our homes by 10 degrees and releases water vapor from their leaves. Trees placed around buildings can reduce air conditioning costs by 30% and heating costs by 20 to 50%. Trees have calming effects. The University of Washington study found there is less graffiti, vandalism, and littering in outside spaces with trees compared with spaces without plants. According to the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, exposure to trees boosts the immune system, lowers blood pressure, reduces stress, improves mood, increases ability to focus, accelerates recovery from surgery, increases energy level, and improves sleep. Trees increase property values. U.S. Forestry Service found trees increase property values for homes with street trees or mature trees by 20%. The U.S. Forest Service states that every dollar spent on planting and caring for a community tree yields benefits 2 to 5 times the investment. A mature tree often has appraised value between $1,000 and $10,000. Trees benefit wildlife. Trees provide food source for animals, along with shelter and habitat. 1 mature oak can be home to as many as 500 species. Many animals, such as birds and squirrels, spend most of their lives in trees. People love to hear birds singing. No trees, no birds.
Thank you, ma'am. Next card, please, clerk.
William Klein.
Advance this before my timing starts. Globally, heat waves kill 12,000 people annually. Sustained temperatures over 95 degrees are defined as a death ridge. Large tree canopies prevent these conditions by absorbing rainwater and releasing water vapor, forming clouds for future rain. When developers clear-cut trees, build structures, and pave over land, temperatures are increased, resulting in a heat island effect. Temperatures can rise into the hundreds. Surface and car temperatures can rise to 160 degrees, which can be deadly. Florida saved my life. As a child, I suffered from bronchitis, asthma, and pneumonia caused by the polluted air of Detroit. In 1947, the doctors said I could not survive another year in Detroit and convinced my parents to move to Florida, where the air was clean by the ocean and the trees. Now I want to save and restore Florida's environment by protecting the forest and the trees. In 1996, the St. John River Water Management District reported that the Indian River Lagoon had been degraded during the last century, largely as a result of the loss of natural land by development. The report detailed programs to restore the IRL. While many corrective actions have been completed, developers continued clear-cutting trees, destroying wetlands and waterways, creating much more pollution than has been removed. Now the IRL has extensive algae blooms and fish kills. Many people are afraid to swim or eat fish from the IRL. According to the 2040 Comprehensive Plan, 4,800 acres are available for development. Should these acres be clear-cut, an additional 3.4 billion gallons of polluted stormwater will dump into the drains and into the IRL. American Forest recommends a 40% tree canopy for all healthy cities. 40% for healthy cities. New York has recently completed planting 1 million trees. Atlanta is investing $3.1 million annually to increase tree canopy for the reduction of temperatures by 2.7 degrees. Baltimore has set a goal to establish a 40% tree canopy by planting trees. They're going to have more trees than us. Titusville City Council is responsible for the safety and the quality of life in Titusville. An urban forestry program is needed with strong enforceable regulations to eliminate clear-cutting and planting trees and shrubs to obtain a 45% tree canopy. The City of Gainesville prepared, whoops, I'm not passing these. Well, where am I? I don't know. Cities that value their trees and the benefits they provide have strong enforceable regulations that apply to trees in the city. Atlanta charges up to $1,000 to cut down a 6-inch diameter tree. New York requires all buildings with 25 feet of road frontage to plant 1 tree per 25 feet. Improper tree pruning in New York or the unapproved removal of a tree is fined up to $15,000 and 1 year in jail. Titusville would be smart to develop strong enforceable regulations in order to gain the benefits discussed. I'm sorry I'm running out of time, but I have a lot more here.
Can I make a suggestion to whoever's in charge of this group that someone takes care of the click while the speaker speaks? It's hard to do both.
Merrill's Brickell.
Increasing urbanization puts a strain on a city's natural resources, such as water. As the city grows, more land will be developed, creating a high proportion of impervious surfaces. Paved areas do not allow rainwater to soak into the ground. One solution, trees. When rain falls, it first hits the tree canopy where it stays and evaporates or falls to the ground. In this way, the tree canopy acts as an interception point for rainfall. Large tree canopies over impervious surfaces, such as a parking lot or a street, have an impact on reducing stormwater because they work to reduce peak flows. More than 90% of the water is evaporated in transpiration. A mature oak tree transpires 400 gallons of water on one hot summer day. Trees move a lot of water. Trees filter and regulate the flow of water, slowing its fall to the ground, which acts like an enormous sponge. Think about the spongy feeling of the wet earth underfoot. A tree can absorb up to 18 inches of precipitation before gradually releasing it to natural channels and recharging groundwater. In urban and suburban settings, a single deciduous tree can intercept from 500 to 760 gallons per year. That's a lot of stormwater. When the EPA ordered Philadelphia to reduce its sewer overflows by 85%, the software showed planners that a $2.4 billion investment in new green infrastructure will absorb the rainwater. The alternative was spending $10 billion in updated subterranean pipes. Trees are an investment, not an expense. The connection between groundwater and surface water means that anything found in the surface water can find its way into the ground. A Gainesville, Florida study shows that trees influence urban hydrology by improving water quality through the interception of pollution and reduction of stormwater flows. They found that for each 5% increase in tree cover, stormwater flow is reduced by 2%. In 2016, it is estimated that rainfall interception from trees in the Gainesville urban forest saved the city $3.8 million in stormwater control costs. The land use with the greatest avoided runoff value is forested. The second greatest value is in residential areas. Trees are an investment, not an expense.
Ruthie Cook.
I'm down here, guys. Guess I'm not. Trees and woody plants are very good at removing nutrients like nitrates and phosphates and contaminants such as metals, pesticides, solvents, and oils from soil and water. The pollutants are either used for growth, since the nutrients act as fertilizer, or they are stored. Parking lots are one of the fastest growing land uses. It's becoming a major cause of the degradation of water quality. Contaminants such as petroleum products and heavy metals eventually end up in the Indian River. Trees in parking lots, especially in bioretention areas where stormwater flows, can have a positive impact on water quality and work to reduce flooding. Their root systems collect impurities as water seeps through the soil. Rain refreshes the land and nourishes the green landscape. But as houses, stores, schools, roads, and parking lots spread and natural tree cover is lost, so is the absorbing effect of vegetation and soil. The welcome rain becomes costly stormwater runoff. Trees reduce the amount of stormwater that runs off pavement and roofs, diminishing the amount of polluted stormwater that must be treated before it reaches the lagoon. Trees collect raindrops on their leaves and on epiphytic plants where the water evaporates. Trees along the Indian River's banks can help prevent erosion and damage to the riparian zone during flooding events. This is what the south side of the Titusville Causeway looked like after Hurricane Irma, where cabbage palms helped to hold the shoreline in place. This is what the south side of Titusville Causeway looked like after Hurricane Irma, where there were no trees. This is what the south side of the causeway looks like today. Gotta take a deep breath for this sentence. On the left, notice the cabbage palm trees at the top of the picture, and where the shoreline is by those palm trees compared to the location of the shoreline where there are no trees. Just look at the picture. The health of the Indian River Lagoon is integral to the success of our community. It is our most endangered and our most important habitat. Retaining and enhancing Titusville's exceptional tree coverage is an enormously effective method, very important word, for maintaining the river's well-being. Protect a tree you know you will never sit under.
Next card, please, clerk.
Dean Pettit.
Okay. Is this my opening slide, or? Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of Titusville City Council. My name is Dean Richard Pettit. I served for 16 years as member of the chairman, or member of the Titusville Environmental Commission, 10 years as its chair. Much of the following information is taken from the book Conservation Design for Subdivisions by Mr. Randall Arendt that my lovely assistant Kathleen was going to hold aloft. Give her a hand, ladies and gentlemen. Give her a hand. Did great, baby. He actually spoke at the city probably about 10 years ago, back when Courtney Barker was on our planning department. Green neighborhoods, did this work? Yeah, it did. Green neighborhoods are such a great value for the developer and buyer compared to a clear-cut subdivision, and we're going to discuss why. First of all, there is a streamlined site approval, which reduces the design costs, lower development costs, and then there is a quality of life which results in increased market value. Big trees and shaded open space strikes a responsive chord among homeowners. When given a choice, consumers have demonstrated their clear preference for buying homes that have big views of big trees and natural areas. We're going to go to Harmony. Harmony is a community between Melbourne and Orlando. Now, if you look at it, there's quite a bit of development off to the left, but there is also a tremendous and beautiful tree preservation area buffered by a recreational showcase for the neighborhood. And this has a very tremendous value on the value of the homes. In fact, you'll find that the homes closest to the green area will be substantially higher than the homes further away. We're going to the current market in Titusville. The sales signs at the entrance of some of our, where's my sales sign? Sales signs around Titusville indicate that the price point for average new homes here in Titusville are between $200K and $350K. These are on clear-cut lots. The zoning change, which is this diagram you see in front of you, has just granted a density increase to 143 homes on a clear-cut site. Their stated price point is roughly $225,000 per home. However, if we go to the green math alternative, you're giving up 24 homes to preserve a wetlands that was in the green area, and you still have a net of 119 homes. You've established a green subdivision with open views for everyone in the community park and a wetland suitable for creation of trails and other things that would help to increase the livelihood and the standard of living there. And we have established an upland buffer without the houses crowding the wetlands. This is very similar to Harmony. This can garner at least a price point towards the high end of our current market at $325K. A few more homes would be subtracted for yet unknown locations of big trees to maintain about 112 home lots. So if we look at the math, clear-cut density, 143 homes, current price point, $225,000. Construction costs are higher, also costs more for the city to maintain these properties. And gross value is $32 million. Now, when I say the city maintaining, I'm talking about providing services. We do a green, 119 homes, upland buffer, 325K, lower construction costs, lower costs to the city to maintain and provide services. $39 million, that's an increase, $7 million. I'm liking this. The greener, 112 homes, you have an upland buffer, big trees, current price points, $340K, construction costs are lower yet, $38 million. The green and greener it grows between $6 and $7 million more than the current Titusville approach, and the construction costs are reduced for an additional profit margin.
Are you close to the end, sir?
Sir?
Are you close to the end of your segment? I think.
You know I'm old and deaf.
So am I, Dean. Don't worry about it. You're over the time limits. Are you close to over with it? Finishing?
Where's my time limit? Oh, dang. I guess I'm over. That's all, folks.
Thank you, sir. Clerk, can you move the timer where I can actually see it, because I hear it buzzing? No, not there. Clerk.
On the counter.
Dean, do me a favor. Go up there and just take that timer up there. There you go.
He's asking about this right here.
Oh, that thing.
Just move. Yeah, there you go.
How's that for you?
That's great.
It says I got 3 minutes.
Good job.
If Kathleen wants to defer, it'll be okay.
Yeah.
You know what the chances of that are, right?
Good evening. Thank you, Dean. I am going to speak on the Uplands Conservation.
Name and-
Kathleen Burson. Actually, there's two ordinances that we'd like to see in the city of Titusville that work hand in hand. We found these ordinances to be commonly hand in hand in Tampa, San Antonio, Indian River County. That one is the tree protection ordinance, which you all know, and there's also an upland habitat protection ordinance. So 2 tools for tree protection. I'm talking about the Uplands Conservation District. There's the book. That's the manual for the design process. And I've used some examples from this book. So we have a unique opportunity. We have large green areas on our future land use map. These are the most beautiful, contiguous, and undisturbed uplands and wetlands in Titusville with a low density of 1 house per acre. This is very unique. This density was put on these properties in the late 80s, and it was because of the environmental sensitivity. They put a low density, like an agricultural density, to protect, so it would be more in balance rather than packing houses on it and saying goodbye to the integrity. So here's our future land use map, and you see the majority of the green areas are in the core of the city. And they, like I said, that's 1 unit per 5 acres. So this begins the process of the green neighborhood design. And so we're proposing this for this area and not all over the city. Okay, so step 1, you start with that 1 unit per 5 acres, and you allow for an increase in density. So this example is like 1 unit per acre. So you can't go a lot higher than that, because then you can't preserve anything. So you take that's your yield density. So say that's 30 homes or 50 homes. Okay. So then you transfer the density from that shows the primary conservation area, which is wetlands. That's state mandated. You don't get density for that area. Okay. And then the second step is to determine where the secondary conservation areas are, the most pristine upland habitat. So this would be at first for Titusville to preserve some big trees with habitat intact. You don't transfer density, you transfer the density from the upland, not so sensitive areas to the most pristine areas. Okay, so this is what it looks like. You have instead of those 1 acre lots being spread out, or those houses on 1 acre lots, you cluster these houses onto small, am I done?
Finish up as
Okay.
quickly as
You cluster the houses in the less sensitive areas. And that's still the same number of houses. So you've got a grand quality of life and trails and habitat, and gopher tortoises get to stay for once. And big trees too. And the next is Michael Myjack. Thank you.
Michael Myjack, Alpine Lane, Titusville, and I'm the current chairman of the Titusville Environmental Commission. We did a lot of background research to figure out how best to do tree protection. So we took the idea of finding some kind of gold standard, and we tried to find that first within Florida and then outside. And we looked in a lot of different places, and we got a lot of different data. A tree protection ordinance, we believe, needs to be strong enough for site developers to give the respect due the trees. They can't speak for themselves, only we can speak for them. And they help us in the long run, as you've already heard by some of the stories. They help us save money. They help us get rid of stormwater. They actually evaporate it, transevaporation. So as much as we can use from the trees, we need to be able to find a way to build within those environments. So we want it to be a balanced and fair proposition. Right now, we currently save 10% of vegetation. It's not tree canopy, it's not anything special. We don't say anything about whether it needs to be of a particular type or value. One of the things that we don't do is we don't mitigate equally. We will mitigate a tree, but in Tampa, when they mitigate a tree, they want that canopy replaced in 5 years. They call it parity. So if you're gonna try to balance removing a 25-inch oak tree with putting back a 2-inch DBH, I don't know, loblolly bay or anything, it's got to have a crepe myrtle, yeah. It's got to have a canopy that's comparable. That's what we want. That's what we want in the city, tree canopy. We found many effective ordinances. The most effective seem to define heritage and specimen trees as different than everything else. A specimen tree, as we found in San Antonio and Tampa, were 5 inches and larger. Anything 5 inches and larger would be mitigated. Anything larger than 24 inches would be a specimen or a heritage tree. A heritage tree has a different structure to its mitigation fees. We really want those to stay in the large trees. The other tools that we can use are what we call root protection zones. 2 feet for every inch of DBH needs to be separated and spaced around these trees to provide them adequate food and nourishment and stability. Putting trees in small little spaces removes their stability, and they tend to blow over in windstorms. So we need to provide enough ground around them. We have to prevent heavy machinery from rolling over the roots. I've been told that the structural roots, if they get broken, will kill the tree in a matter of a few years, just from heavy machinery. So they need to be roped off and separated when they get set aside. We believe that a minimum tree canopy is the approach that we should take. Tallahassee, I don't know if they have a minimum. I do know that there is a tree canopy requirement in many other cities. Tampa has one. San Antonio is 35% for single-family resident, 40% for everything else. I believe I'm just getting into the cost structure of it.
Please finish as soon as you can.
Yes, sir. That's it. I'll call it time. Thank you.
Name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, Sandra Klinger, 2680 Bobcat Trail, Titusville. I'm here to mainly speak specifically to one topic, and that would be trees that have been described as the untouchable trees or the heritage trees. Member Dan Diesel asked a question, which trees are considered untouchable? In the legal language of tree ordinances, the untouchables are protected trees given either heritage or significant designation, depending upon several criteria, which include the species, size, potential lifespan, health, and their importance to wildlife. Long-lived species, such as the live oak, slash pine, longleaf pine, and scrub oak, are examples of these trees. The live oak is known as the most wind-tolerant and long-lived shade tree in Florida. Compare the potential lifespan of live oak trees, which can be up to 2,000 years for an individual tree. The tree in this picture is angel oak, which happens to be in South Carolina, and they estimate its age to be between 400 and 1,500 years. Its trunk diameter is 25 feet around. Other oak trees, such as laurel oaks, typically live 80 years or less. In a protected environment, a live oak's canopy can spread to be over 100 feet and grow to a height of 60 feet. The healthy live oak is the epitome of an untouchable tree. In upland music forests, live oaks grow tall and maintain smaller caliper and canopy. The best case scenario is to protect these trees in a tree tract with their understory and other trees associated in the native community. That provides longer-term survival for the trees in that community. A forest is stronger than a single tree. Slash pines and longleaf pines deserve special consideration due to their importance to woodpecker species, such as the pileated woodpecker or the red cockaded woodpecker. These birds can only nest in tall trees, wood ducks as well. Without large pines, woodpeckers would not exist in our community. Slash and longleaf pines grow 60 to 80 feet tall with a canopy spread of up to 60 feet. Slash and longleaf pines are threatened more than other species because they currently have few protections, but are also important to maintain the diversity of our community. Scrub oaks are another tree species that would be identified as an untouchable. They are dwarfed in comparison to live oaks, but deserve designation of heritage for their significance to the scrub ecosystem and their lifespan, especially the sand live oak. The associated tree species include the myrtle oak and Chapman oak. These are just some of the trees deserving the most protection. Thank you for taking the time to hold this workshop. We hope you will give staff direction to come back with ordinances that will effectively increase protection of trees. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
My name is Kay St. Ange, and I'm going to conclude this presentation for you. Titusville is making a comeback. We are delighted people want to move to our community. An appropriate balance can be attained between growth and preservation. But in the gateway to nature and space, it is critical that developers preserve as many native trees as possible by whatever means is possible for the benefits of residents, wildlife, and the Indian River Lagoon. For residents to receive all the many benefits of trees, the trees must be preserved among the houses, not merely on the edges of the subdivision. Council are denying the residents the benefits of living among trees when they allow developers to clear cut. New tree protection regulations need to address this. Developers will need to design with an intent to preserve trees. The placement of roads, sidewalks, and houses should highlight specimen and heritage trees. The results will be well worth the efforts. The most effective way to preserve tree canopy among houses is with tree tracts. Deeded land set aside to preserve stands of mature trees held in ownership by the HOA. Regulations should require deeded tree tracts between certain of those house lots without mature trees or behind house lots. The 2040 comp plan stipulates neighborhoods should have a high-quality streetscape, including canopy trees to support property values, provide shade for pedestrians, and decrease energy use. More street trees should be required. Street medians are an effective option to provide canopy and shade with mature or planted trees, reducing heat buildup. Buffers and tree belts around wetlands should be expanded. At public hearings, citizens repeatedly asked for increased buffers. Wide bands of trees around wetlands are essential to protect our aquifers from pollutants. Ineffective mitigation regulations have allowed entire forests to be cut. Consider Tampa's mitigation regulations as a gold standard. A comprehensive urban forestry program is needed, stipulating a percentage of tree canopies in line with gold standards. As the 2040 comp plan indicates, 4,800 acres are available for development in Titusville. We cannot continue to allow developers to clear cut. We urge Council to write new regulations to prevent clear cutting and to preserve as many trees as possible, creating desirable residential developments. I have 2 more sentences. As this will increase profitability, reduction in maximum density should be negotiated with developers. In turn, this will increase the tax base of the town. The results will be attractive new neighborhoods and a prosperous community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Next card, please.
Mary Murray.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'm Mary Murray. I'm officer with the League of Women Voters and also a member or a citizen of Titusville. We've heard a lot of information about trees here tonight. One of the important things we wanted to make you aware of is the long-term need for planning, and the secondary component about we need to look at additional funding, which isn't always very easy. We talked about additional staff, and I'll touch on a few of those things quickly. The League of Women Voters Florida has a very strong position on natural resources and has published a wonderful study that's called, Is It Hot Enough for You? And this is about heat islands and urban islands that are getting warmer and warmer. This is a very holistic look, but a key component of it is the tree preservation. The League believes for every dollar you spend, you'll get $3 back. Some of the projections are a little higher, so they're a little conservative, but it's important to note. At the League, we take a huge encompassing look at natural resources. We have Terry LaPlante here, who's the chair of the local government, who's working right now on plastic bans, has worked on fertilizer bans. We just finished a solar cooperative, so we take this broad look. We believe that we need to enforce existing ordinances here in Titusville, along with looking to improve ordinances here in Titusville. Tree canopy on private property becomes a challenge in an existing environment. So everything that has been said by the tree project is critical, but we've had all these areas that were clear cut. And what do we do about that? We believe, number one, that education is critical, and then we need to look at ways to restore trees. We want all those great big heritage trees kept, all those new ordinances, but now how do we go back and fix the canopy? And that's what I'm going to talk briefly about. I spoke before the League, or before the council, about coming from St. Louis Park, Minnesota, who was a gold standard when it comes to this, and they did a couple things. One, they created a list of trees that were acceptable for development. Those trees were not crepe myrtles and they were not palms, well, especially not in Minnesota, but they were very clear that they had to be providing canopy. So there is an existing list that's existing today for Central Florida. I happen to have that information and can send it over. So that's one for the developers. Two, with the development that's going on is selective clearing. And again, it goes back to protecting those trees and the foliage around them. In the state of Minnesota, what they did with their tree trust is they used all those funds to create new trees within the park systems and all of the areas there. We believe that it would be a collaborative effort between the government, the League, other nonprofits, the U.S. Forestry and U.S. EPA, along with arborists and greenscapers, to create this plan, looking at funding as part of a donation, grant program, and fundraising program that would then be run to create that additional forest space that would be restoring.
Thank you, ma'am. Next card, please.
Simon Stratford.
I'm Simon Stratford, Stratford Tree Surgery. I'm a qualified UK tree surgeon, which is a legal requirement before anyone can touch a tree in the UK. And I'm a certified arborist. So we've heard a lot about trees being mitigated, moved, they're going to be replanted. I just wanted to go over a few facts about trees. We touch them every single day in the environment here. A tree structure, there is nothing that a tree grows that it doesn't need, firstly. It is completely unregulated here on who touches trees and how they're actually pruned. The removal of lower limbs is absolutely incorrect. If you think of a crane that pulls up to your driveway and puts the jib up and carries a heavy weight, it puts outriggers down low. That's the same as these limbs on oak trees or any tree. If you pull those in, the load's going to tip over. So as the tree gets higher, it needs longer and longer limbs. So the removal of those actually leads to tree failure. We have another practice of a lot of tissue being removed from the inside of trees. Category 1 hurricane wind speeds, I think, are bracketed between 85 and 96 miles an hour. At 90 miles an hour, a tree will release its leafage. That reduces drag on itself. They've been around for 400 million years, so I think they know what they're doing. If you take a live oak, just to give you some numbers, 70 pounds a cubic foot is what a live oak weighs. It will take upwards of 40 gallons a day through its tree system, which on a UK gallon is about nearly a quarter of a tonne every single day. That makes that structure the most dangerous structure that you live under, work under, and your children exist under. So when you're planting these oak trees in very small areas, which when they're mature need about 1,000 square feet to feed in, and you have an unregulated individual come along, take off all the lower limbs, take all the insides out, every 4 foot, that piece of limb moves, it quadruples its weight. So 70 pounds becomes 280 pounds, moving towards your roof, your car, your children, pedestrians. So there's a reason why we have regulation in the UK on who touches trees and how they're touched. So before anything is moved, mitigated, planted, there are experts in your own city that are more than happy to give free advice on how trees should be pruned and maintained. That's me. I'm early.
Thank you, sir. Next card, please.
Tim McWilliams.
Tim McWilliams. I sat on the Scrub Jay Committee for the Brevard County back in the 90s and also in the state HCP for the Scrub Jay. I am a developer. I just like the council to consider a couple things that there really aren't being included here. One is the cost of housing. The people that aren't represented here, the new owners that are coming in, we see it all the time. The developer is just looking at a formula. The cities make the rules. We come in and look at a piece of property. What makes economic sense, we develop it. If we can't, we move on. The homeowner or the landowner is the one that's going to really carry this burden of a much more expensive tree ordinance. I love trees. I sat on the Scrub Jay Committee because I felt very passionate about it. I was involved in saving a lot of Carl land through the state, and we took an approach that tree preservation, we wanted density in one area, and we wanted tree preservation, and we tried to intersperse it where we could, but the reality of it is if you start spreading out development, houses farther apart, it gets more expensive. And it just hurts the homeowner in the long run, those new families that are in their 20s trying to buy a house. You know, when you push the house from 250 to 300 or 350, you'd be amazed how quickly that cost can go up. So I would just ask that you consider the cost of the regulations that you're considering. The other thing that you need to consider is that we usually have to raise a site around 3.5 feet to meet the current regulations in the St. John's to preserve the river. I've got no problem with that. It keeps the water on site, makes it treated on site. There's nothing wrong with that. But what that does is it forces you to clear cut for land. There's nothing else you can do. I have saved many trees in many subdivisions through the years, and many of them have died 5, 6, big, large trees, 5, 6, 7 years later because there was disturbed around it. There was nothing you could do. The road was going there. If you avoid it completely, then you just make the project more expensive, then you can't develop, so then you don't have housing for people. So it's a balance between the two. You're going to have to, sometimes you're going to have to give up things to reach a compromise that makes the whole system work. The last thing I would just consider is remember the 90s, some of us that were here when they shut a whole county. It was Flagler County was shut down. They evacuated 45,000 residents because there was the fires that were going on. And they had if you've ever been to Flagler County, they have tons and tons of trees, and they had lots of houses and problems because they couldn't clear, they weren't clearing around the houses. So then there was a slingshot in the other direction where all these rules wanted us to clear everything. So we as developers, again, work with the rules. I think you just need to consider all the factors in all of it, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Next card, please, clerk.
Arlene Baker.
Hello, my name is Arlen Baker. I have been on the Planning and Zoning Board for a while, and I've also been involved in a project that was called, among other names, Tortoise Ridge, that the city signed off on in 2008, and this is my copy of this. And it is now the piece of property that Brookshire subdivision, same piece of property. It's now looking like it's going to be developed as Brookshire subdivision. I have very little to say. I just wanted to ask you all to please go back over a lot of this material. The city has all of this also. It's very detailed in what is actually on that site. It was done by the state conservationists. So this is not anybody local. This was actually all of the paperwork we had to go through to be able to get this put on Florida Forever. It was approved for Florida Forever. The only reason it is not now a Florida Forever property is because the next year it was not funded. And so had that been a year earlier, that particular piece of property would be protected right now. So it is also in our area of critical concern. It is a very important piece of property to everyone that drinks water. And that really cannot be overestimated. I do want to also say thank you for those of you that did such an excellent job on the presentations that we saw today. This is just wonderful. And I would like to challenge the council to please make Titusville an exceptional town. Listen to what you've been hearing about the tree preservation and how important this is. This is not just a little trend. This is people's lives, and it's long-term. And we need to get out of the shadow of Titusville being something that's not desirable, and we can make this be Titusville that everybody wants to live in and have a nice, beautiful town additional. So I'd like to ask you please to listen to a lot of the things that have been said tonight. It's been very well done, and thank everyone that did such a good job on the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next card, please.
Mary Spar.
Good evening. I'm Mary Spar, and I'm speaking for Sierra Club Turtle Coast Group. For a minute, please think about the city's image in the eyes of people who might want to move here. What comes to mind when people think of Titusville? Your city is seen as a beautiful place with many large trees and also a place in the midst of a growth spurt. It's extremely important to project that positive image to help you grow. And it's equally important to protect your natural assets such as trees so that you can maintain that positive image. In contrast to Titusville, there are municipalities that project an image of growth and annexation at almost any cost to the current residents and the natural resources. In fact, I've often thought I would never want to live there. Obviously, you are not the only local government that wants subdivisions built for new space workers. There's competition, and your biggest competitor is the unincorporated county. For example, proposed subdivisions and townhomes in North Merritt Island are being touted as necessary to house the space workers. Yet Brevard County has a tree ordinance requiring much more canopy preservation and protection for specimen trees. Brevard County's tree protection ordinance is conscientiously enforced. If Titusville is to fare well in the competition for new space workers, it needs to address the clear-cutting problem. I'm sure you don't want Titusville's image to be the birding festival city with a big clear-cutting problem. Your tree regulations need to be strengthened with the addition of canopy requirements, better preservation of specimen trees, and early submittal of the tree survey so that you, the City Council, can provide oversight during plan review to ensure the continued beauty of our city. Sierra Club urges you to move forward to strengthen the tree protection ordinance, and in the meantime, give direction to staff to enforce the existing tree regulations in a way that minimizes clear cutting and preserves more trees.
Perfect timing. Thank you, ma'am. Next card, please.
Woody Rice.
Woody Rice, and the one thing I think we can all agree on is the value of trees. There's no doubt in my mind that the value of trees are important to our community. I'd like to cover, the first topic is Park Preserve. Since I'm pretty intimate with Park Preserve, I was the designer on that project. And we, in my view, we tried to do the right thing. We preserved a large tree canopy in the back. We pushed everything toward the road, toward the front. I had to deal with floodplain management, elevations, FEMA elevations. You have to be 1 foot above that, so I had a grading issue. So I'm going to put 2 to 3 feet of fill over top of existing trees that weren't going to survive. So the best thing to do is to take it and shove the entire development as far toward Park Avenue or Knox McRae as we possibly could. And that's what we did. We preserved wetlands, we preserved tree canopy, we put a stormwater pond off to the side to try to help hydrate the existing lake. We did stormwater management, we did all that things. And yes, did we lose some trees? We did lose some trees, okay? But there was competing interests there. And so, yes, we shoved everything over and got the density there. So I'm a little disappointed that Park Preserve looked at it as a clear cut when a large tract of land was preserved, okay? And we tried to do that. The second thing, I think from a tree perspective, you need to take a comprehensive approach, okay, to if you want to preserve trees. So if you want to preserve more green space and everything, I think we're all for that, okay? But let's look at parking sizes, parking counts, roadway design. Let's look at reducing the impervious area that's required so we can reduce the stormwater ponds, reduce the impervious area, take all those things and have more green space. That's a more comprehensive approach to doing that. You start looking at, the building code requires that homes are at least 1 foot above the crown of the road. The floodplain code says you have to be 1 foot above the 100-year floodplain. You have drainage issues. You got to make sure the water is flowing away from homes. You never want to flood a home in a 100-year storm. Building setbacks. What about building setbacks? We're very rigid, okay? 10 feet, 25. Why not be flexible there? If I can move a building around on a site and go to 10 feet on one side to save a tree over here, give me the freedom to do that. Don't say, well, you can only adjust it by 10% because that's what the current code says. You can go to the DRCA and get a 10% waiver. Give us the flexibility. Give us the tools in which to do those type of things. Curbing. Why are we still curbing? Why don't we do low impact development? Why, right now we take curbs. We run it through stormwater. We run all these pipes. If we had roadside swells and allowed water to go off and percolate into the ground right there, it would reduce my stormwater pond. It would do a lot of things. Why not change the code on curbing, okay? The other thing with just long-term perspective from a commercial standpoint, it's code enforcement. We have all these landscape plans that we've approved all these years, and trees die and bushes die, but no one goes out there and really does much about it, and so sites start getting tired looking. They get tired looking because they don't get replaced. Why? Those are things that I think we can do to improve the code. And there's a litany of things.
Mr. Rice,
take a
please,
comprehensive plan.
if you can wrap it up at this point, you're.
I'm done. It's just take a comprehensive approach to the problem.
Thank you, sir. Next card, please.
David Boto.
That's David Boto, and I live in Indian Harbor Beach. I serve as a volunteer on the board of the Marine Resources Council. I'd like to talk about trees in the Indian River Lagoon. In your comprehensive plan, you mentioned low-impact development, and we just heard some more about it. In your coastal element, you set a policy there for low-impact development. We are going to urge that you adopt that as quickly as possible. And what I wanted to tell you is that when you're designing a site for low-impact development, in determining the design and engineering for that site, the first two things you consider are to minimize impervious surface. The second thing is to minimize soil disruption and soil compaction. But once the real activities of low-impact development are on, the number one line of defense are trees. A tree is the most cost-effective runoff reducer in our toolbox. And as you know, runoff is our deadly enemy for the Indian River Lagoon. We must think of the lagoon in all our decisions. We cannot continue to operate and manage development without considering its impact on the lagoon. The trees must be considered, low-impact development must be considered. I don't envy you. I know you have a tough job. Accelerated growth in Brevard is really going. And you, Titusville, are the epicenter. You're ground zero for that accelerated development. So I know your job is tough. I don't envy it. I respect and admire you for the job you have to do to face your responsibility to the Indian River Lagoon, because you and you alone and your counterparts throughout the county are responsible for the long-term health of the Indian River Lagoon. The Lagoon, Save the Lagoon program can't do anything about development and managing land use. Only you, with your staffs, your boards, are responsible for the long-term health, and you must live up to that responsibility. Look at low-impact development, please, and move toward it as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
That's all the cards.
Amazing. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak that has not filled out a card? If you wish to do it at this point.
Speak now or forever.
Speak now, no, not forever. Just speak now or this evening, you can get a second chance. All right, great. Staff, you want to accept some comments or?
What we'd like to know from you are those things that you would like more information on, that were intriguing to you, any kind of direction that you can give us as we're developing this ordinance that you've asked us to put together would be very helpful.
I'd first like to make a little statement. We've heard a lot of good information tonight and there are, I hate to use two sides because everybody's actually working in the same direction, just from different perspectives. And we need what is good for the environment. We also need housing for people. And it's a tough road to hoe, as has been mentioned up here. But let's all keep it in mind, and particularly staff, that we need to compromise in some of these things on both sides to make it happen and get the ability to not fall into one category or the other. As somebody mentioned, that we get, the town gets a bad name for doing that, and I would agree with that.
Excuse me, so you're asking us to make everybody mad?
I kind of was hoping to make everybody happy.
It never goes that way.
Well, probably not, but let's try our best. No, can everybody get everything they want? No, it's true with everything. But we can come up with the best job we can in working for the ultimate good of the city. I had something else on here. In my opinion, especially, I would like you to pay particular interest in on the matter of clear cutting. I think that is of tremendous importance, and I do not like clear cutting. I'll just say it that way. Certainly, and we need to make some adjustments on that, in my opinion. You're next, ma'am.
I'm next.
You are next.
I've got notes all over the place, so I don't really know which way I'm going. But I will say, I like Woody's ideas. Having swells instead of curb. Some of those, and not having so much impervious surface. I understand that it is difficult to try to save the trees sometimes and put the development in. I really have a hard time when I see these huge, I'm gonna call them heritage trees, being taken down. And somebody showed me a photo of the one that's being taken down in Brookshire, and it just, it made me cringe. It made me cringe. I saw some of the development plans with just trees X'd out all over the place. And I think we can do a whole lot better job of keeping some of those trees in there. And you know, maybe we need to compromise, but we also need those trees. It hurts my soul to see those subdivisions, and it says 10% native vegetation should be preserved. And you have these little shrubs, and you have the one tree in the back that's this big around. And I'm like, I don't know how to get from here to there totally, but I know what I want to see. I mean, our comprehensive plan says we will prevent clear cutting, and we're not. So I'm like, wow.
Could you tell me what your definition of clear cutting is?
It looks like, and I may be wrong, but it looks like, as my dad said, developer has you go in and knock down every trees and flatten everything out.
So your idea of clear cutting is 100% of that property has been?
Right.
Okay, got it.
But my other thought, as we're sitting here talking, is I look at it and go, you know, it says 10% should be in native vegetation, and I don't think we're living up to that standard. So that bothers me.
Can I add to that, though? But we
Sure.
have to also be more specific as to what native vegetation is, including the types of plants. It can be a very low plant and of no significance at all, and maybe it doesn't do any good. I mean, certain types of grass are native, certain types of grass are native vegetation, but I think we have to define that a little better. And speaking to them, it's hard to speak over here.
So you would like to see us prioritize the value of some of these native plants?
That sounds correct.
I'd also like to see a tree survey come in when we get our site plans, showing how we're going to mitigate what trees we can save. I've never seen a tree survey, I don't think. Unless I
You don't review site plans, but do you mean at sketch plat?
The sketch plan.
Thank you, okay.
Yes. Yes. Because I want to see what we're doing, what we can save and what we can't save. And I understand there are going to be things that we can't save. But to me, it's also very important, these large trees, that we are protecting them.
And when you do this, what you're going to be doing is front-loading what the developer has to do. So he's going to be spending more money up front in engineering before a decision is made.
Okay.
So that is the downside to the more information, there's more cost, which is part of that balancing act.
Okay, understand.
Okay.
Ma'am, please, we can't have speaking at this point. You have no microphone, it's not right.
So, and I'd like to see it, if I didn't say this, where heritage trees do not get removed.
Mandatory preservation of heritage.
Correct. Or come see council. I mean, if you really think a tree has to go, that's a heritage tree. Can't hear you. Oh, sorry. I was just saying that if a developer really believes a heritage tree needs to be removed, then maybe they need to come see council. But I'm thinking those heritage trees stay.
Anything else?
I got notes all over the place. I was scribbling all the time.
Me
How about
too.
if I could be quiet for a while?
Okay. Member Jordan, you indicated you want to be next?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, good. My wife says I got a nice soft voice, but I guess I should only have a soft voice with her, so.
We hope so.
I really appreciate everyone who came out tonight. It certainly was a learning experience for me, but I don't think, any of us up here don't like trees. We all like trees. It's hot in Florida, and trees are a wonderful asset that we have. What we need to do is really take a balanced approach to what we're trying to do. And I think Woody Wright said it right when he said a comprehensive look at what we're doing. Sometimes we put a lot of things in place, and it sounds good, but when you talk about, I think it might have been Kathleen who came to me and said that we have to speak for the trees. And we all need to speak for the plants and animals because they can't do it for themselves for sure. So first of all, I know, and I want to thank our ex-attorney also for coming to talk to me, because the sketch plan, it looks like there's a lot of stuff that the sketch plan should have, but I don't think anyone uses it for anything. So I need to understand, if you got a sketch plan and you ask for it to show the condition, the characteristics, the adjacent development, the wooded areas, the location of major trees. I would think that would be part of the decision-making on how you're going to develop that property. So if you're asking them to do that, then we should use it for something, right? Because we don't see that. Now, first of all, I will tell you, I don't want to micromanage anything. I think it's the responsibility of staff to make sure what ordinance we put in place are carried out. So I personally don't think just looking at some of the stuff that we already have on the books now, I think if we just took care of the things that's on the book, then we would be in a lot better place, I think. You're looking at me funny. Oh, okay. God bless you, lady.
She says that's the only look she's got.
That's the only look she's got for sure. But anyway, what I'm saying is, if we're asking the developer to come up with a sketch plat, what is that being used for if it's not going to be used to ensure that we have we mitigate the trees, we make sure that we don't take out anything more than what we have to. And when you look at, and Woody actually, he explained pretty well about Park Place, I think is the name of it, Knox McCrae and Park Avenue. It did look like everything was just clear cut, but I remember when the storm came, it was a river over there. So you had to raise all that up, and of course you're going to lose some space. One of the concerns I have, and I think one of the speakers talked about it over here, was you got to be real careful when you bring the big equipment in on the land, because you can destroy some of the trees while you're doing it. You may not want to, you want to preserve them, but when you start bringing the big equipment there, of course, there's going to be, it may take 3 to 5 years, but you're going to harm those trees. I love the idea if we could come up with a list of trees that we would like if we have to mitigate, because crepe myrtles aren't it. And if you look at the ones on the boulevard, then you'll see every year they get cut back anyhow, and then they grow, they flourish the next year. But they're not, in my mind, they're not trees. They're, they're flowering plants, if you will. Also, I like the idea of the untouchables. To me, that's a great idea. But, to me, I think we do our trees a disservice when we say, if we do cut one down, then we have to do 2 to 1. But I really think it needs to be, someone said that they should be able to grow back within 2 to 3 or 5 years. Yeah, in 5 years. So the first thing I thought about, because someone gave me a maple tree, and that thing grows so fast it's ridiculous. But there's a problem with that tree, and that is its root system. It'll get on the sidewalk, and it will break up the sidewalk, and it will break up your foundation. So you got to be real careful. So I think we just need a list of trees that we could mitigate, replace if we have to do it. Also, let me see. Of course, there is, I think one of the developers said we need to consider the cost of regulation. I think we definitely need to do that for sure, because we are in a good place when it comes down to development, and I really believe that if we could do the right thing by compromising with the developer compromising with us as it relates to trees. But I think put trees on the front burner when we're developing, to say that we don't want to lose any more trees than we absolutely have to, but also understand that if you've got to extend water lines and sewer lines, that's going to be more expensive, which means it's going to cost more money for the developer. So we just need to balance that for sure. I think that's it for right now, but I think the atmosphere around this city is certainly not only pro-growth, but also smart growth. But we also have to make sure that we are maintaining and doing the right things for the future of our kids. We want our kids to have trees just like we have trees that you could put a swing on and all that good stuff for sure. The only sad part I see today, I'm looking around and all of us are over 30. we really need to have some young people who are involved in this also, because they are, oh, I'm sorry. One person, you're the token, sorry about that. But anyhow, I just think we, you know, if we're gonna come up, and I think if we had a team of people, because the arborists here, I love the way you talk. You talk really well, for sure, yeah. Stafford?
Simon.
Simon? Stafford?
Oh, Stafford.
Stafford, yeah, Stafford. I really think that, you know, when we do start cutting trees, we definitely need to have an arborist or something that, even though the law has changed now that says you can cut down your tree, but you gotta have an arborist involved in the thing. I think that's a smart idea for sure, so. I think there's a lot of smart people in this room, and I certainly ask staff to reach out to some of the speakers today and get some of their ideas, because I think there's a lot of good ideas in the room. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Vice Mayor?
Well, clearly, when you speak forth, most everything's been said. We all took notes. I probably should use theirs because I really can't read mine very well. But that being said, there's a couple things that stand out to me. Never had that happen before. One of them is, and Mr. Severs, I appreciate you bringing that up to myself at least. Perhaps we're not getting everything we need at the council meeting when we look at the plat sketch. I think that when I got to look at a detailed report that Mr. Severs presented, I can't tell you I felt like I knew everything that we had perhaps voted on. That's certainly got something to do with my fault. The other fault is I'm not sure what I'm looking for, and I'd like to know what I'm looking for. I'm going to kind of read these in order. I had to write something down about Village Grove, Laceda, awesome. What's the difference? How does that happen as opposed to the flattening of all the trees? How does that come about versus the other?
Well, stormwater standards have changed. One of the things I wrote down is what year was the Village Grove constructed. I recently moved out of a house that we had lived in 19 years and the trees were quite mature.
Right.
So I don't know how long how long that development was. I do know that as standards change, so does the way the development looks. So I have it written down that I need to do some research, and I'd be happy to get back to you and tell you what I think from the age, if the standards were any different, as to why that community looks different.
Yeah, please do, because clearly that looks a whole lot different than the clear cutting, and I think that would go a long way.
Or it may have been clear cutted and now we're looking at it 20 years later.
Correct. I was kind of writing down at first, do we do a good job of enforcing proper tree mitigation? But then, quite honestly, when I'm looking at the presentation and I see these little twigs in front as mitigation, clearly we need to either enhance our mitigation ordinances, or we need to enforce them because we're not being mitigated. You know, and I've seen a lot of pictures in the last few weeks from people. The word mitigation sounds good, but it's got to be something that's completed and done. And so that bothers me. Go ahead.
Could I ask a question? Let's say that, I think that you're using mitigation in a very broad term.
I am.
For instance, if you have a piece of property that has already been, for some reason, clear cut, 20 years ago, nobody ever developed on it. Now you want to go back in. You're actually talking about landscape standards as well as mitigation standards. We may be requiring too few trees, too small trees, when we require a landscape plan as well as the mitigation. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think what I'm trying to look for is if you're going to mitigate, and maybe we need to be more specific. You know, I'd like to see some oak trees and have some of these contractors perhaps not try to throw a crepe myrtle out there and call that mitigation. I'd like to think that when we're up there and they're talking to us about all the things they're going to do, we're not talking about, you know, just pushing it to the side and put a couple crepe myrtles out there. I really want to see the mitigation, and I want to see trees. And then certainly I mentioned it before, and it was mentioned today, the untouchables. Do we have a list right now of untouchables, or is that something we're going to start initiating?
What we have is a requirement that at a certain size, you have to do mitigation. But we do not have mandatory protection of certain trees, which is what I believe you mean by the word untouchables.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and there are some communities that say, if you want to remove a certain tree, you do have to come to the council and ask, or you can't do it, period, or it's so expensive that most of them just walk away. But what we have done is said, you mitigate over a certain size. And I think that that is not where you would like us to go.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I certainly, looking at that tree that we saw earlier, between 400 and 1,500 years old, I think that's something you come to the council to say, what about this? I mean, you can't replace 400 to 1,500 years, with a simple planting of a crepe myrtle. So So, and again, most of the points have been touched. I don't think I need to hit on the fact that, we all know, and somebody eloquently put it up there last, sir, that we're all in this county aware that we have a lot of growth going on with SpaceX and Blue Origin and all those things. And I know that when I was running, I was saying it and people were saying it to me, we're tired of losing the tax dollars to Vieira, or Merritt Island, as the man mentioned, is going on. But we have to do the right things too by trees. I got the vision of that Village Grove. I just think that that's something we ought to get in our vision, if that can work, and we don't have to knock everything down. I'm maybe being a little bit, I don't want to use that term, tree hugging here. I'm not trying to do that. But I know you're looking at me here. But this is the time to at least say that side of it. And this is a time to have you guys look at it and say, what can we do that we don't look at all these X'd out trees? It's the boom, boom, boom. And we don't want to make it so easy that it's just, see you later. So let's take a shot at making it right. That's it.
Add one more.
Anything? Go ahead.
I get to add one more. Well, before I forget, we were talking about impervious surfaces versus pervious surfaces. I know we had the discussion way back about how more expensive it was to have an impervious surface.
Pervious pavers are more expensive.
Okay.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Would it be worthwhile to turn around and do an incentive if people are not using impervious surfaces, if they're using something else, give them an incentive to use that?
Well, actually, I'll write that down, but in
Okay.
order to develop in an area, especially area of critical concern where we have a certain amount of pervious limitation, that's almost the only way that people can develop things like the CVS there on Cheney, because they had to put pervious pavers or they weren't developing it at all.
Okay.
But we can still look at more incentives. There may be something else out there.
I just think it'd be great for our environment not to have so much pavement, if we could get away from it.
We can make parking lot areas smaller. We can make, the people don't like that because they open their door and they hit the neighbor, but we can make parking, I know, we can make it smaller. We can make them shorter. Again, if you drive a large truck, you may not care too much for that. We can, there are lots of options, but remember that every time you do that, there's going to be a trade-off, which could include having to go get more paint put on your car.
As the person up here with the smallest vehicle.
And the most paint put on their car.
Paint put on my car. Sorry.
Anything else? Excuse me, sir. I see nothing else from council at this point. I have to say, in looking at... I'm sorry? Go. I turned it off so it didn't interfere with his. I think the council seems to all be heading in the same direction, and it is looking to the future with the consideration of things that we need to progress. So I think it's been a very good meeting and a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be, so that's good also. But are the directions clear to staff? And I'm glad to hear that. I want to thank you all for coming and voicing your opinions and your expertise. We appreciate it very much. With that, if there's nothing else, I'll declare this meeting adjourned.